In today's episode of the Pathmark Presents podcast, we have an interesting guest here with me today. I'm with Lizzie Carroll. She's heading over from the team at Turquoise Health, and she is, as it's nice how her LinkedIn says that, all things content at Turquoise. And obviously, being a marketing-driven podcast here at Pathmark, we're curious to learn more about what Turquoise is, what it does, how they're helping their clients, and also how Lizzie is thinking about content and growth for the company. And then at the end, we're curious to learn a little bit more about her journey when it comes to marketing. Welcome to the show, Lizzie.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Very good. So give us that 360 overview. What is Turquoise Health all about?
So Turquoise Health, in big, elevator pitch, what is that we do? We are modernizing the revenue cycle industry through new data from some legislation that had to happen in the beginning of 2020, 2021, and then ultimately making it so we can have better, empowered, savvy patients who can shop for healthcare in the same way they would shop for anything else.
Very good. And let's go deeper a little bit into this. We had a brief chat. It has a B2B, it has a B2B, it has a B2C angle. Maybe break that down for us a little bit, how companies benefiting and how our sort of end users or patients benefiting.
Sure. So kind of as I said before, with that legislation, so it's pretty complicated, but in essence, what it is that there was some legislation that was passed that made it so both providers, so like a hospital, and payers, so like insurers, have to be transparent about their healthcare prices in the United States. This was a big change for that industry. It's a very radical change for them and a big adjustment. And what it does is lots of different things. By making that data public, we collect all of that data across the internet, put it together, clean it, parse it, look through all of it, and license it out back to researchers, to any of these payers or providers who might be interested in using it as a benchmarking tool, as a data information tool, as a way to strengthen their negotiations. And so the B2B element is those payers and providers, but the B2C element is also that consumers now can go look and see how much does it cost to go get a particular procedure done. It's not as clean cut as knowing exactly like how much you'll pay. There's lots of different things that go into, what price is being shown and your insurance and the different factors that are there. But ultimately, in the future, as we develop more products, it would be as simple as you go there, you type in your insurance, you figure out what the procedure you need to get done, and you could calculate what would you in general have to pay to get a certain thing done.
Makes a whole lot of sense. Now, if we take the sort of the B2B angle for the sake of the podcast primarily, how do these businesses learn about Turquoise? Like, what's their journey? Like, what are the channels that they come across? What is the thought process or the issue that they face on how to, discover Turquoise?
So I think initially, because this legislation passed and it was very new, Turquoise is in a very unique position in this space, and that sort of being the only company that is taking this on. So it was lots of just inbound messages. I think people are just hearing of us and through the news, through press, as we were doing lots of work to educate people about these laws and what it was. And now it's a lot of like through LinkedIn. That's where I spend a lot of my time now, is creating content that we can share out there. We have a very phenomenal sales team who uses their own LinkedIn and the connections that they have to continue and further educating the followers that they have. Because we have so much data and it's so interesting, a lot of it, even just from a data standpoint of like, what's the highest cost thing in this particular area, and looking at it. And so finding different ways to sort of speak to our different audience members via different types of content. They make their way to our website, ideally by finding it, and then they reach out to us. And whether that's a question about their own compliance or the legislation or whatever it is, I think there's lots of different avenues back to us because of that.
I see. And what role, you mentioned content, which is obviously driving people to the website. Like what role do you attribute to the website now, and also moving forward with that sort of B2B approach? Like what role do you see for the website?
I think I'd see it as kind of one of the largest players. I think depending on where you are, your website could either be your social proof, it's your way that you get scheduled appointments, it's your showcasing your work. Each person comes to a website and in their mind categorizes as a different thing. Is it purely just social proof? Do they want to see you're legitimate? Do they want to sit and read through every single page and look at all of your blog and really learn about you? Is it just a way of them clicking to your website, finding the closest contact box and filling the information in? So I think it will continue to play that role, especially because B2B in virtual world, because we can't really do as many things in person still. A lot of those connections are being facilitated by our lovely sales team, the connections that they have. They find their way back to their website, I think, are just in native search. It still is the top direction back to our website. People just knowing the Turquoise name and looking it up.
Very good.
Definitely a big role.
And as a content marketer specifically, like how do you look sort of at the strength and as sort of the room for improvement for the page in itself? If we take on that, content marketer glasses, like how do you look at the website? Where do you see sort of, this is where the page is really strong versus where this is, where you want to, keep on putting effort into?
So I think because, like I said, we're in an earlier stage startup and I'm relatively newer to the organization, what's there is kind of what has just been up there when we needed something to legitimize us, begin to talk about what it is, the thing that we do, and begin to direct traffic to the site. We're in the process of redoing it entirely, not really altering like the main nav necessarily, but like really honing in on what's the value proposition, what's the flow of the users get from one place to the next. How do we want to encourage people to utilize the tools that are made free and available on the website itself? And how do we want to be able to roll out products in the future that are tied to the website as well?
Very cool. Is there something that you've learned like in your career? Because you've been not primarily only in content, you've always been in marketing, leading marketing even, but also obviously as a lead copywriter. What have you learned? Like what is key for websites in order to figure out why people do or do not convert from the pages? Is there any approaches, any tools, any methodologies that you've picked up over the years that you found to be helpful?
Ooh, good question. Oh my gosh, so many of them. Let me think of what would be the most like interesting one to say first. I guess a little bit of my background. I came from a marketing agency that was specialized in more like public health campaigns as opposed to e-commerce campaigns. And a lot of those public health campaigns are tied to like city organization of, city associations of, so they're kind of inherently boring. And those clients are sort of inherently risk averse. They are not interested in being funny. They're not really interested in being entertaining. They're only interested in being educational, which doesn't translate to like a hard hitting selling landing page with a great headline. Like it's very cut and dry. It's very vague. But I think there's a fun challenge in there that if you can find a way to make something that is a little bit more cut and dry, interesting, or at least lead them through the page in an interesting way, that you'll find a lot of success. So I guess sort of speaking to the people who they're like, I'm not selling cool t-shirts or rock band merch or cool food, like something that you just need to get a clear point across. For me, I always lean towards humor in even just the smallest ways that I can find it. If your page is easy to scan, you can kind of think of all of the headlines. If you weren't reading anything but them, could you find a way to sort of like get them to talk to each other? Yeah. So like say you have a headline at the top and it's like, oh gosh, I don't know. I'm trying to think of
don't run yourself into like a big example that you have to build up. No worries, but it makes sense. Okay. It makes sense. It's like you build up the structure, and then you build up humor into that structure. Even is that what you're saying?
Yeah, as best you can. Like I think even just if it's referencing something that you said at the top, and then like just building on it a tiny bit. Like if at the top you say like we're the #1 source of whatever, and then you get closer to the bottom and you're like, well, there are a couple other people who say they're also the #1 source, but here's why we're actually the #1 source. And then you get to the bottom and you're like, have we convinced you? Click this button and we'll go ahead. Like you don't have to be funny for laughs in the same way that you can be like, you can reference back to yourself. You can create a little bit of awareness of what's happening, sort of like talking to the mind of the person who's probably reading the page. Like if you're a actuary and you need better actuary software, I don't know how thrilling that is to go look up, or how interesting you want your software platform, or how wild you want them to be. But if you can find a way to speak to the experience of the person who's reading the page, I think that they'll enjoy it a little bit more and will likely get them to remember you over someone who's like, we're the #1 selling buzzword, 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 buzzword. and you should pick us. And obviously you're here, so you know exactly why we're awesome and valuable to you.
Yeah, we have a lot of like SaaS marketers on the show, and obviously SaaS products can be inherently abstract in a way, right? You have to somehow explain what they do. What's your take of it? Like, what can people, very high level advices, maybe it's a course, maybe it's a book, maybe it's just a concept. What should marketers do in order to have a more clear, concise writing that people understand quickly? Because I think we have a lot of marketers here on the show even that struggle a bit with getting that message across very clearly. What's your take on that?
I think regardless of what you're talking about, if you're talking about being clear and concise, then I always think of, if you've ever seen the TV show The Simpsons, there's one episode, I don't even remember what episode it is, where Homer is standing in front of a blackboard, and behind him in chalk is a sign, and it says, "Brevity is wit." And when I first started out doing copywriting, I had written that down on a sticky note, and I wrote, "If brevity is wit, then I will never be a clever girl," because I could not help but write things so long. It was so hard to cut a paragraph. Like every sentence was just beautiful to me, and it was so painful to make it shorter. And so I would always just stare at that sticky note and be like, I want to be clever. I want to be clever. It will be so much better if this is shorter. Nobody cares that my beautiful sentences, I'm not getting paid less if I delete them. So if you write something once, copy paste it underneath it, find a way to cut it in half, then do that again. And if you've done that twice and now you've lost all of like the zhuzh, start over. Like then you clearly haven't found a way to simmer down your main point, because
Cool.
if you can't cut it down twice and it still doesn't have a little something, you don't know what the main point is yet.
That's a very, very practical advice. Is there anything else that you've learned for copywriting on websites? Like, there's a lot of debate on describing features, describing benefits. What have you learned is something, from a copywriting angle that really resonates with folks, like, or how to balance this? I know it's a very abstract question, but maybe you have a sort of a take on it.
No, that's okay. The first thing that comes to mind is speaking to pain points that someone might have. I don't know who said it, but someone really smart said that like all marketing is either like bringing you farther away from pain and closer to pleasure. So if I'm writing a page about a software for actuaries, and I know that one of their biggest pain points is that they don't like having to copy paste things into the same portal 5,000 times, then the first headline on my page talking about that will speak to that pain and immediately say why I'm the anecdote for it. So like, even it's just as simple as like, tired of copy pasting? Question mark. Boy, have we got something for you, like something different than that. But like find those pain points, really narrow in on them and find ways to speak to them. You can weave in features and awards and testimonials within those. But if you're not immediately addressing the reason why someone came to your website, they're probably going to leave until someone else does.
Very good. Very cool. I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk with you a little bit about content, and not so much in a way of how to create content, but more a content creator like yourself or content marketer like yourself. Where do you like to read? Like, how do you hone your craft? Is reading a part of honing the craft? And if so, where do you like to read, and where do you find high quality content?
Oh my gosh. Yes, I love to read. Nothing makes me feel more insecure as someone who thinks they're a good writer than when someone says words that I don't know the meaning of and they can weave it into the whole beautiful sentence, and they're talking as if like, clearly I would have known what this big like 50-cent word is to explain something. So it always immediately makes me think I need to read more. I need to broaden what I'm doing here so I can understand more. I think just having a healthy appetite for what is interesting to me fiction wise will help no matter what, just because then I will likely enjoy the book I'm reading and finish it. I've tried reading lots of different books on writing, and I don't necessarily find them boring, but I think they make me want to write and stop reading the book. So I don't find those to be helpful to actually like the exercise,
Yeah.
So
that's very interesting.
Find a book you like that you'll finish. I think it's just a starter, and then keep finding more. As far as like things in relation to content specifically, there's a copywriter who I have a very big professional crush on, in the sense of I want to be him. His name is Cole Schaefer. He has his own freelance business called Honey Copy. I buy all of his courses. I subscribe to all of his emails. They make me so angry. They make me want to be such a better writer. He's so good. So highly recommend any of his stuff. if you like to be fueled by jealousy, really, is that sort of a go-to that way. If you're looking to like hone your craft, I think trying to make things shorter or just looking at your own weaknesses as far as like, if you constantly add words that have ing or ly at the end, like write your whole page of whatever and just do a command search for that thing, and then sit with yourself when like the whole page lights up and there's like 50 of them, and then go through it and remove them all and redo your sentences, and then like just keep note of those things. Do you use just too much? Put it on a sticky note. All of your LYs, all of your, I get stuck in anytime I'm trying to write out something about features, I always do a list of 3. So then the whole page is just lots of lists of 3. So I just have like a little notepad that I'll take my first attempt. I think it's great. I'll go through my list then and just start cutting it apart. So that's a good way too. Just knowing your weaknesses. What are the things that you do that you know you tend to do a lot that you'd like to change?
Very interesting. I have some rapid fire questions as we're slowly approaching the end of the interview already. Are you ready for those?
Sure, go for it.
What's the last book you read?
Empire and the Vampire by Jay Kristoff.
What's the single thing your company is focused on the most at the moment?
Focused on the most. Ooh, that's a good question. I think thoughtfulness. One thing that I appreciate the most about just my team and why I was so attracted to working there in the first place is that being a startup, you have this need towards speed and scale and blah. But even within that, it feels like there is a very high level of being very thoughtful about the people that you hire, the things that you talk about, what is it that you're doing, who are you making it for? So thoughtfulness.
If there would be no boundaries in tech, right? Everything is possible. What's the one thing you would fix for your role?
Oh gosh. I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but it was the first thing that made me think mansplaining. I'd like to outlaw mansplaining. I get mansplained very often. Tech is a very male-centric place. The amount of times that someone will be like, wow, that was such a great idea. How did you come up with that great idea? I have to be like, well, just my little brain. It thinks.
Oh, fair enough.
I don't know if that's where you're going with that, but that was my first.
No,
idea.
I'm going nowhere. You're picking because you are the one with the no boundaries. What is the last thing that kept you awake at night about the company?
About the company? Ooh, kind of as I mentioned before, trying to insert humor into places. I love to be funny. That's my favorite go-to. If I'm trying to think of how to fill a page, I want it to be something that makes people laugh. But finding why strategically humor is important has been difficult and a challenge. I want it to feel like it has a part to play. We're not just being funny to be funny, that there's a reason why we would want to make you laugh while talking about this thing. So I spent a lot of time thinking about, how funny do you be, how cheeky, how snarky, how do you balance just like telling people what they need to hear while also making them laugh? Does it take away from what they need to hear? Does it turn them off? Yeah, so I think about that a lot.
Is there like research on this? As people are interested in diving deeper in that? If you come across something?
Oh gosh. That's a good question. I've never like Googled it. I just kind of think about it a lot anecdotally. Because like I said, sometimes I worry that because it's my go-to, that in a way it's a bit of a weakness. I don't want to always have to make something funny to be able to fill the page and make it interesting. I should be able to do that and be relatively cut and dry, or, whatever is sort of necessary in the moment. And especially with content, we're not BuzzFeed. The audience is not looking to be entertained. They're looking to solve a problem. And I don't want to do anything that could retract from that feeling of like, well, they don't even take themselves seriously. Why would we want to take them seriously? So I just think about it often, like, is this appropriate? How much is too much? Anyway.
Very interesting. It's a very interesting question because it makes potentially even things more likable to read, more easier to understand in a certain way. But then there's the fine line. Very cool. Very last question. If we would be doing a bit of time travel and we go back to the days of California State, right? You're heading out of formal education into the world of marketing and tech and business and the likes. What's the one advice you would give yourself?
Oh my gosh, the one advice I'd give myself. I think just try things and don't be afraid to be really bad at them. I think especially when it comes to like writing content in particular, there is nothing worse than filling a blank page. I don't care what you're writing or how interested you are in it or how much you know about it. Watching that cursor like blink at you, it's like insulting. It's like, you are bad at your job. Watch it blink. It's insulted, telling me how bad I am. It knows all of my insecurities. And I would be really afraid to even begin writing anything because I didn't want it to be bad. And which is sort of silly. There's a delete key. No one is watching me type through these sentences. And I think it made it so I was nervous to show anybody anything. And it took I spread out the time of growing larger and took longer to do it because I didn't really give them the opportunity to correct what I was doing fast enough.
Very good.
So that's what I'd say. Just be bad
Very
at
cool.
something. No one knows how bad you are at it, only you do.
And for the very last question, I want to give you pretty much the last word, so that people can take sort of the last insight on Turquoise with themselves. So if people would be forgetting all that we discussed today on Turquoise, what's the one thing they should remember?
Oh gosh. The one thing you should remember, pricing transparency in healthcare is very interesting and very complex, but it is also such a cool way to think about the evolution of healthcare in the United States. It doesn't matter what player you are, everybody is a patient at least once in their lives. So fun to think about it that way.
Thanks a lot for being a guest on Pathmark Presents.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.